Hi, everybody. I'm assuming that I think we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Fridays with Sue and Steph. Steph and I were talking about the idea of doing good deeds and how, like, you can do them. I mean, if doing it is the best teaching for your kids, I don't know where I went wrong, but
Right. That's funny. Yeah.
But what I will say, just as an opening, is that when my kids were younger and lived with us, they didn't want to do anything I did. So like I was the one in my family who went and helped and did and they refused. They were not at all interested in the things I did. They found their own things, but they weren't interested in anything I did. And I will, for any parents who are feeling similarly, I will say as adults, they have found their way into a world of paying it forward. So I guess it might be that the timing is different than I hoped for, but that, they did find their way into
Yeah.
doing good in the world.
Yeah,
So
that's such a good one. That's a great
do you feel the
frame of
same
it.
way?
Yeah. The only one I could come up with, right, same thing. Like I'm killing myself, right, doing a billion things, very similar to you. But we did for a child welfare agency here in town. We always did they get lists of the kids whom they serve, and the kids fill out wish lists. And so we would always select wish lists that matched our kids' ages, and I would take them to Target or Walmart or wherever, and they would walk around with their lists and match presents. So we did do that for a number of years. And one of my kids definitely went with me, at least one of them, to like go then wrap those presents at that agency for a bit. But I'm with you. It's like, okay, like, and my kids are enough younger. Like, I'm like, okay, so what are they gonna, we always talk about modeling and, what we're doing. Like, and I think that's a great thing for parents to hear, that like, as we kill ourselves trying to set these examples, that you start to see them embrace their own projects and passions, right?
Well, I mean, I'm sure for both of us, we didn't do it to be role models. Like that never
No,
was the
no.
motive. But I would be at things where people's kids would come to participate. And I always felt a little bit badly that when I offered it up, I got one very big no. But they first of all, some of my kids went to the local public school where they had a requirement for hours. And I loved that because they had to think about how did they want to do it. So one of my kids, he would have done an animal shelter. We went there and we tried to make that happen, but that couldn't happen. He was 100% clear that it was not going to involve kids. Like he did not want the old end or the young end of life at all. And so he did work he volunteered at a place that collected books locally and distributed them for free. And he became like the little darling of these three middle-aged to older women who were running the program. So that was a very lovely experience for him. And then one of my kids, I think it's National Friendship Circle.
Funny, I always wondered if it was. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure it's national. So one of my kids did where you get like able paired with disable, and it was really hard and such a growth experience. She did it with a friend, and they went to a young girl's house who was being raised by grandparents, and the girl was on the spectrum. And so it was really hard for her, but I think she grew so much from it, right? Like it was such a positive experience.
No, I was going to say, I know Suzanne Schnaps, whom we've had on before. She and I have had this conversation about, this, and especially now as we talk about mental health, like this strong tie between one's mental health and doing for others in the form of volunteerism. There's such a strong tie, and how that makes people feel, like get you out of your own head and doing for others. And the one thing I've always asked her is, but how do you get somebody to do it the first time? I understand the back end and how you're feeling, but when you haven't had that experience, and she's like, yeah, well, that's the tricky part. It's either like having some suggestions or saying, hey, why don't you come with me? I'm going to go blah, blah. But I think, I've read so many articles about that. And I do know there is this, I don't do it for my own purposes. I do it because I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's how I was raised. And it makes me feel so good. And I'm always surprised by that feeling. It's almost like when you exercise, you can get the endorphins going, a different feeling, but where like, you're like, wow, like that is such a big, like it felt so little to me. But I felt so good doing it.
Yeah. And one of my kids, I texted my kids to see what they had done. So one of my kids just texted that there was a school program where they would go on Friday afternoons down to an underserved school, and they would work with elementary school kids on reading. And so that program was a program that I also participated in on my own. It was offered to the schools, but also to individuals. And our engagement with that program, like every time I went, I got in my car. It was this weird thing. I would get in my car and this thing would run through my head that I just put a Band-Aid on a hemorrhage. And every week my kid would come home and be so thrilled for the experience. So it through the lens of like a little bit of cynicism versus youthful, like, wow, that felt so good to do that. And the big thing about that story is that I didn't push it. It was a school run program. It wasn't like mom saying you should find something to do. And that was more meaningful because there was ownership in it. It wasn't like a parent dragging me along. So I think, with the families who do it together, hats off to you.
Yeah.
But that was not something that worked in my house. But
Two for two.
Yeah, but they did find ways to be engaged when opportunities were presented outside of the family unit.
Well, and you did just make me think of something that I'd forgotten all about. So when one of our kids was at the Montessori High School down here in University Circle, well, two things. One is the kids every day, school ended maybe 4:00 technically, 3:40, the kids all cleaned the school. They all had an assignment for the week or whatever. So that was daily. But the other thing they did was, I think it was every other Friday, they were in the community, like Friday afternoons or whatever it was, right? Where they were dispersed to different places. And in fact, it's remind me, I want to ask that child who was home about what he remembers of that.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it in so long. When you just said school and in the context of this, all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute.
I mean, you might think that it's the family's responsibility, and I wouldn't disagree, but it's so helpful when it happens from an external force, and it isn't like my mother nagging me one more time about one more thing I should be doing. So
who doesn't want to do that with friends, right? It's fun to do with friends. Yeah. Anything's fun with friends.
And now my kids are politically active and community active, and very much for their little salaries, making sure they give to organizations that they believe in. So I think the role modeling just doesn't have the satisfaction in my life of having immediacy.
Same. And if we're defining immediacy as some unknown amount of time for me, that is still in that bucket. Whereas you're starting to see that.
We have an article that someone wrote about their kid. I don't think Jessica's on now, but maybe we'll put it up after. But their kid noticing something that their mother did and thinking it was so nice, and it was to the mom, it was so small. So I had that experience where I was in line at the grocery store and someone had a candy bar behind me, and I just said, "Oh, I'll pay for the candy bar." And the woman was like, we're talking like $2, $3. And the woman couldn't thank me enough. And afterwards, we got in the car and my kid said to me, "That was so nice." And I'm like, I do a lot of really nice things.
That's the one.
I don't think that's so nice. And he's, no, it's so, like, of all of the things that I spend my time doing, this is the thing that will stick with that kid, that I paid for someone's candy bar. Anyway, it's just so interesting because in some ways the little acts of kindness really change someone else's day in a way that's different than like being part of something that feels bigger but isn't like totally like one-on-one, one-to-one, like that.
Yeah. But the other thing I wrote on here was paying for the person behind you.
Yeah.
So I think wait, there was something else you just said about the kids and the things.
I did it one time at the Barnes and Noble. And I did it because I had seen someone do it somewhere else, and I thought, oh, I'm doing it today too. So I paid for the person behind me's coffee, and then they paid for the person's coffee behind them, and it was literally. And then this guy was watching, and he's like, "Oh my God, that was so cool! I'm doing it next." And it was all because of the person. I did it because I saw someone else do it.
Yeah,
it's so the reaction of like you just made someone's day. Oh, look,
Yeah.
Jessica is here. Look at her. She got it up there. Yay, Jessica.
Yay. Well, I want to go back to something you said about it was so small to you. And that is something we do talk a lot about as a family, where there are these things that people either we do for people or people do for us. They're like, that was such a small thing, but it meant like the world to that person. And it's so funny. It just happened to me 5 minutes ago. I lost a pin on my backpack when I was hiking a few weeks ago. A friend had gotten it for me and something came up about it maybe a few days ago. And I texted her. I'm like, I'm so sad. I lost the pin you got me. So yesterday, what arrived in the mail was a replacement pin. And I just put it on my backpack. And I'm like, that made me so, I could have done it myself. But it didn't matter. Like, it was so kind, like that somebody took that step.
Yeah. I mean, I have one of these like literally life-changing moments and the person barely remembers it who did it.
Right.
So one of my kids was having surgery and we were very casual about it, but it was a microscopic ear surgery that had some risks that were significant. And we went down to the hospital by ourselves and we didn't really broadcast it anywhere because it seemed like not worthy. And after 5 minutes after the kid went back to have surgery, we were like, oh my God, what do we do now? We're both so anxious and we're equally anxious. So we can't really support each other. And a friend walked in. And she was like, I don't know if you want company. And we were like, we didn't, but we didn't know how much we needed it. And they sat and so, it changed how I react to other people now because I always go. And when I tell her how it changed my life, she kind of looks like, are you kidding? It was so not a big deal to her. And it did.
But it was to you. Yeah.
Like magnificently changed my life.
Yeah. You just said something else. Wait a minute. I feel like I was about to weave it back to somebody we interviewed yesterday. It flew through so quickly. I was going to make such a beautiful tie and it's gone. Who did we
do you have anything? Let me see if I don't think anyone else jumped on with anything exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was thinking of this idea of something small and feeling good. It's so gone. It really was good.
But I mean, the one thing I'll talk so that you can think of it.
Yeah.
But the one thing I'll say about people are very funny about going to visit people in the waiting room at the hospital, or even if they're in the hospital. And literally because of my friend, I always err on the side of going. I also am quick to retreat. So if I go and it seems like you don't need anybody there, I can say, just brought you a cup of coffee. That's it. Want to leave. Yeah. Or so I mean, like when people say, but I would never go. And it's like, well, I'm just going to tell you this story about how it changed my life. So my takeaway was of showing up and knowing if you're not really welcome, then you just politely say, I literally just wanted to let you know I was thinking of you.
Okay. And thank you for that story because it brought me back to the moment. So yesterday you interviewed Emma
Banois,
which I recommend everybody watch. It was so articulate, wonderful young woman who had attempted to die by suicide. And she shares her story. It was beautiful. And she talked about, you asked the question, Sue, something like, well, what should parents know? Or what should parents do? It was something like that. But her answer was like sit in it with me. Like, don't throw me but your life is so great. You have so many friends and and everything to it, blah, blah. Oh, thank you, Jessica. She just put it excellent. They want to know that you're sitting in that trench with them. And I think it's that same thing where like you showed up, right? And your feelings, I just had this conversation with one of our kids about helping someone in a grief process. And I said, I think the important thing is to offer things and offer to be there and also be okay if they refuse or 5 minutes before they can't do it and giving them that leeway or that latitude. Like, my feelings are not hurt. I'm just checking in. I'm going to text you 5 minutes before I leave to go work out. And if you want to come, that's great. And you can't do it, that's great too. And I'll keep texting. So giving people that latitude, kind of like what you said, like you show up, but you also can disappear quickly.
Yeah. And I mean, what you just said is like, don't take it personally. And so if you're willing to take that risk of like maybe a little bit of a sting, because you might have shown up and it might feel like rejection, if you go in knowing that you're prepared for both of those scenarios, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good I mean, I think grief could be a good topic. Also, I think there's so much it's hard stuff. I think it's hard stuff at our current ages. And I think it's really hard for our kids, and supporting friends and all that, I think, is a really interesting topic. And how do you do that?
Well,
So
maybe
hard.
Jessica can find some articles because we've written about it lots of times. Anyway, it was fun to be with you guys, and glad Jessica popped on to put on the links. And we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next Friday.
And go Guardians, 1:00 today.
And we're sure all of you are rooting.